Hello viewers, welcome to part 2 of the film Introduction to Classroom Communication. At the end of part 1, we have learned that intended messages do not always reach the receiver. There are barriers in classroom communication. Though these barriers relate to teacher, students, message, method and media, and learning environment, in this part of the film, we will try to identify some of the teacher-related barriers in classroom communication. Though there are many teacher-related barriers in classroom communication, we will only focus on 7 of the major barriers in classroom communication. These barriers include inadequate knowledge of the subject matter, lack of confidence and motivation on the part of the teacher, inadequate understanding of the students in the class, incorrect perceptions about oneself and the world around, hidden agenda, lack of communication skills on the part of the teacher, and biases and prejudices of the teacher. Now let's closely examine how each one of these barriers lead to ineffective classroom communication. The first and the foremost requirement in any classroom situation is the knowledge of the subject matter, and if the teacher who is teaching in the class lacks the knowledge of the subject matter, the free flow of information in the class is hindered. The teacher does not encourage interaction, he doesn't encourage clarification of doubts, and he tries to adopt an authoritarian stance in the class because of his lack of confidence due to lack of knowledge of the subject matter. Thus, inadequate knowledge of the subject matter on the part of the teacher contributes to ineffective classroom communication in the class. The second barrier in the classroom communication is lack of confidence and motivation on the part of teacher himself. The teacher who lacks the confidence will not be able to put across his ideas, his views, his opinions freely and openly in the class. He will not be able to maintain an eye contact with the students. At the same time, he will discourage any kind of participation of students in the classroom proceedings. And it is normally said, if you want to motivate others, you ought to be motivated yourself. And the teacher who lacks the willingness to exert effort, to communicate, to acquire more information may lead to creating hindrances in the classroom communication, and he will not be able to arouse the desired level of motivation to learn, to participate among the students in the class. The third factor which leads to barriers in classroom communication is inadequate understanding of the students. Diversity or heterogeneity in the classroom is increasing day by day. In the classroom situation, we have students from rural area, from urban area. We have different ability level students in terms of intelligence. We have students who possess the aptitude for the subject and those who do not possess the aptitude. There are students who are verbal learners, and there are students who are visual learners. And if a teacher is unable to understand these individual differences in the class, will not be able to pitch the lesson or the communication according to the level of the learners. Either the lesson or the communication will go above the heads of the students if it is pitched too high, and it will become very boring and monotonous if it is at a very low level as per the levels of the learners. Thus, inadequate understanding of the students in the class also act as a barrier in the classroom communication. The fourth factor is incorrect perception about oneself and the world around. If a teacher has incorrect perceptions about himself, then he will not be open. He will reject any feedback coming from the students, and he will not encourage their participation or will not accept their point of view in the class. This acts as a barrier in the classroom communication. The students may like to remain aloof. They will not like to participate in the classroom communication. And if the teacher has incorrect perception about the world around, and he thinks that the world is not worth living, it is useless to live in the world, then the teacher becomes pessimistic. And he conveys that pessimism through his communication in the classroom and will be unable to arouse the required level of motivation, and he may also develop certain undesirable attitudes among students. Students will also lack the energy or the enthusiasm to learn or to participate in the classroom communication. And if a teacher has correct perception of the world and he thinks it is worthwhile to live in the world, then he remains optimistic, and that will have desirable effect on the classroom communication. The fifth factor is hidden agenda. A teacher can operate from 4 life positions. I am okay, you are okay. I am okay, you are not okay. I am not okay, you are okay. I am not okay, you are not okay. The best life position to operate is I am okay and you are okay. But in case a teacher operates from any of the remaining 3 life positions, the kind of comfort and the closeness the student is looking in the class, that will be missing, and it will act as a barrier in the classroom communication. For example, if a teacher operates from I am okay, you are not okay, then he will not be in a position to give due regard to the student. He will not accept the student's point of view, and he will reject any kind of feedback coming from the students. Thus, communication in the classroom is adversely affected by the hidden agenda of the teacher. The next factor that can act as a barrier is lack of communication skills, both verbal and non-verbal, on the part of the teacher. Now, let's see what kind of inappropriate verbal behavior can act as a barrier in classroom communication. It can be inappropriate use of language. In the class, if the teacher is not proficient in the language used by him in the classroom situation, the students will not be able to comprehend it or understand what is being said. Incorrect use of grammar can also lead to breakdown in communication. Incorrect use of symbols. If the teacher is not using standard symbols in the classroom and he has designed his own symbols for communication, then also it will lead to ineffective classroom communication or breakdown in the classroom communication process, because students will not be able to interpret those individual symbols coined by the teacher. Many a times, a teacher is in the habit of using technical jargon because he assumes that students belong to a particular discipline and thus all difficult terminology can be used in the class. But unnecessary usage of technical jargon in the classroom situation can act as a hindrance in the understanding of the material, and thus it is a barrier to classroom communication. Let's now see what kind of inappropriate non-verbal behavior on the part of the teacher can act as a barrier in classroom communication. These include incorrect pronunciation, too fast or too slow rate of delivery, harsh tone, too rhythmic a delivery, inappropriate use of pauses, lack of eye contact with the class, inappropriate posture, frown on the face of the teacher, inappropriate gestures, too many accessories, too close or too distant the teacher. Now, for example, many a times a teacher makes a corner as a memory tool for remembering the material which he has learnt or prepared, and he loses the eye contact with the class. Now, this loss of eye contact lead to monotony, boredom, lack of motivation on the part of students to participate in the classroom communication. Or the teacher, when using the chalkboard in the classroom situation, is glued to the chalkboard and he loses completely eye contact with the students. In this kind of situation, again, the presentation and the communication becomes boring and monotonous for the students and thus leads to barrier in effective classroom communication. Let's take another example, too close or too distant. A teacher who remains aloof from students, maintains unnecessary distance from the students in the class, will not be able to show the desired concern for the student, and thus student loses the motivation to participate in classroom communication. And if the teacher goes too close to the learner or the student who is working on the independent assignment, again it will lead to ineffective communication because it may make the student conscious and the student loses the eye contact with the teacher and he also stops working on the independent assignment. Thus, any of these inappropriate nonverbal behavior on the part of teacher can lead to barrier in effective classroom communication. The next major barrier which relate to teacher is biases and prejudices of the teacher himself. As I said earlier, diversity or heterogeneity is on increase in the classroom situation. If a teacher is biased towards certain caste, creed, color or sex, then the teacher will not be able to give due regard to that group. He may indulge in undue criticism or may become sarcastic in his remarks in the classroom situation, and thus the students who belong to that particular category will not be able to participate 100% in the classroom communication. They may also feel dejected or rejected in the classroom situation and thus develop undesirable attitude towards the subject, towards the teacher himself, or towards the education on the whole. Thus, biases and prejudices held by the teacher, they also act as barrier in effective classroom communication. In nutshell, we can say there are 7 major barriers which relate to teacher that can lead to ineffective classroom communication. And these include inadequate knowledge of the subject matter, lack of confidence and motivation on the part of the teacher, inadequate understanding of the students in the class, incorrect perceptions about oneself and the world around, hidden agenda, lack of communication skills, both verbal and non-verbal, and biases and prejudices. In the next part of the video film, we'll try to identify some of the student-related barriers in classroom communication. Till then, goodbye and thank you.